As sad as it may sound, it's pretty hard to trust people nowadays, especially if you've already been betrayed. And the worst thing is that you will never know if a person is capable of betraying you or not. It's pure luck if the person doesn't betray you. I guess I was unlucky because my wife cheated on me, but karma severely punished her a few years later. He sat perched on a stool at the bar's far end, his back pressed against the wall, eyes fixed on a baseball game airing on one of the TVs overhead. Despite standing at a solid 6'in or 6'1" and weighing around 190 pounds, he still paled in comparison to my own stature of 6'4" and 255 pounds. Nonetheless, I approached him cautiously, wary of his potential. I hoped he'd hear me out without resorting to aggression. "Are you Jack Wilson?" I inquired as I made my way toward him. He gave a nod, and I continued. "Can I get you a drink?" "Who are you?" "I don't know you, and I don't need another drink. I'm meeting my wife soon," he responded. "I'm Steve, but that's beside the point. You need to know what's been happening with Julie while you were away on your sales trip," I stated, hoping to pique his interest rather than his ire. "My sales trip? How did you know I was on a sales trip? And how do you know my wife's name?" His tone carried a hint of anger. I stumbled, grappling for words. The situation was precarious, and it could escalate rapidly. "Oh hell, there's no easy way to say this, Jack. I know your wife's name because I've spent most of tonight in bed with her at my place." That's when the altercation began. Well, it wasn't much of a scuffle. He struck me, and I ended up on the floor. Despite his smaller stature, he packed quite a punch. It all happened so quickly that I didn't register the blow until I found myself seated on the barroom floor. He loomed over me, demanding I rise so he could strike me again. I remained seated, gazing up at him, pondering my response. I may have deserved his anger, but I refused to be his punching bag. Why would I confess to having an affair with his wife? It's all about revenge. My name is Stephen Harrow, and while I wouldn't call myself a complete idiot, lately I've been feeling like one. You see, only someone oblivious or preoccupied, and unfortunately I fit both descriptions, wouldn't have noticed what was happening behind my back. I remained clueless until the most stereotypical scenario unfolded. I unexpectedly saw my wife somewhere she shouldn't have been. She explained she was consoling her sister, who had recently broken up with her fiancé and needed support. During a call at work, my wife informed me about her visit to her sister and that she might be home late. She mentioned there was a casserole in the fridge for dinner. Disregarding the healthy tuna casserole, I opted for a beer and burger at a recommended spot, which happened to be about 10 miles away from my office, in the opposite direction of our home. As soon as I stepped into O'Toole's, it didn't take long to spot the two of them together. The individual she sat beside in a secluded booth at the rear of the bar bore a resemblance to her sister, yet their features didn't quite match up, if you catch my drift. Moreover, I had never witnessed my wife engage in the kind of passionate kissing she was sharing with this man. It was an intense, full-on exchange, complete with intimate touching. To be honest, I wasn't all that shocked. I suppose I had been anticipating something of this nature for the past 3 months. My future spouse, Stella Rogers, Stella, and I crossed paths during high school, went on a few dates, and eventually parted ways for different colleges. Our connection wasn't deep, and there were no tearful goodbyes. We simply enjoyed each other's company and moved on. Stella wasn't considered the most conventionally attractive girl in school. In fact, she had a somewhat plain appearance. She wore glasses, still retained some of her baby fat, and lacked any sense of grooming or fashion. However, what she lacked in outward charm, she more than made up for with her sharp wit, satirical humor, and remarkable dancing skills. On the dance floor, Stella underwent a remarkable transformation, outshining the rest of us. We, both of us, constituted a perfect match, though not conventionally attractive. I was tall, thin, and lacked coordination, coupled with an above-average acne issue. If you were to look up geek in the dictionary, you might as well find my photo. But when we were together, we complemented each other well. Nearly 6 years later, I encountered her again. I was enrolled in some postgraduate courses and decided to take a break from studying at a nearby bar off campus. It wasn't my usual spot, but that night I needed to unwind. The atmosphere wasn't particularly noisy, just the usual hum of conversations filled the air. Then suddenly, a silence swept through the room. I found myself gazing into the solitary beer I allowed myself, contemplating how I'd managed to endure one of my classes without losing my temper with the professor. He leaned so far left he practically overlapped with Karl Marx, while I stood just a touch to the right of John Wayne. The bar grew unusually quiet, prompting me to look up and see what was happening. And there she was, Stella. Initially, I didn't recognize her. It wasn't until she flashed that smile and let out a laugh that I realized it was Stella. Wow, she had really transformed, and for the better. Stella had blossomed into an incredibly beautiful woman. The glasses were gone, along with any remnants of baby fat, and the awkward girl unsure of her attire or grooming had vanished. In her place stood this radiant woman, impeccably dressed, with endless legs and a figure that could rival a marble statue. Her long, golden hair cascaded perfectly around her flawlessly made-up face. She was the kind of woman who commanded attention, causing heads to turn wherever she went. Stella was so stunning that even other women couldn't help but admire her, saying things like, "I'd want to be her." I was astonished by Stella's transformation. I chuckled at the thought that I had let her slip away back in high school, realizing that even if we had stayed together, things would have been different now. Like me, she had changed too. While I remained tall, I had filled out thanks to better nutrition and playing tight end in college. Football had also improved my coordination and helped me overcome acne. As I turned to leave the bar, I heard a familiar melodious voice call my name. There stood Stella right in front of me. "Hey, boyfriend, it's been what, about 6 years?" She greeted me, leaning against me, standing on her tiptoes and kissing my cheek. "Hi, Stella, good to see you," I managed to respond once I got my tongue unstuck from the roof of my mouth. For a moment, I felt like the envy of every guy in the place. "Come join us for a drink. We've got a lot of catching up to do," she said, tugging on my hand and leading me over to her group. "Hey guys, grab another table so Steve can join us." I observed as 3 or 4 individuals promptly complied with her request. It was ironic. The girl I used to know was so timid that I was practically the only person she spoke to, and now she was barking orders like a drill sergeant. Stella had certainly transformed. One of the guys in the group inquired about our beverage preferences and went to fetch them. I couldn't help but think how convenient it must be to have servants. Stella and I caught up for several minutes. After exchanging pleasantries, discussing the events of the past 6 years, and updating each other on our current endeavors, I felt compelled to address the elephant in the room. I knew Stella was expecting it, and I couldn't resist. "Wow, Stella, you look fantastic. I almost didn't recognize you. You're quite different from high school," I remarked, admiring this charming individual. "Yep, I've changed, and it's all thanks to you, Steve," she replied, amused by the perplexed expression on my face. "Me? What do you mean it's because of me? I didn't do anything." She chuckled, then burst into laughter. Normally, I wouldn't find a woman of 23 or 24 giggling appealing. She should have outgrown that phase. However, in Stella's case, it was endearing and alluring, making me eager to hear more. I was gazing at her, awaiting an explanation of how I had influenced her transformation. Stella then elucidated why she held me accountable, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say attributed to me her personal growth. She recounted that when we went our separate ways after high school, she felt devastated. She believed that her appearance, her personality, and her shyness had caused me to reject her, or at least that's what she perceived. I began to refute her assertions, but she raised her hand to silence me before I could speak. We never explicitly discussed love or commitment, but that didn't change how I felt. With us heading to different colleges, it seemed inevitable that we would go our separate ways. I didn't want to rationalize or consider the facts of our breakup. I simply believed that if I had been more attractive, thinner, and more polished, you wouldn't have left me, she explained, punctuating her words with a laugh that, in a younger woman might have been a giggle. That's not why... I attempted to interject, but Stella cut me off. I know it wasn't true, but that's how I felt at the time. So I decided to take action and transform myself into someone you would desire. I threw myself into Project Stella during college. I started eating healthier, adopted an exercise routine, frequented the school gym almost daily, began running 3 times a week, eventually working my way up to a 5-mile run, and joined the drama club to overcome my shyness. Stella paused to finish her drink, raising her empty glass and waiting for one of her assistants to bring her another. I even enrolled in a beauty course at a technical college to learn makeup techniques and hairstyling. Then I delved into grooming and fashion literature. By my junior year, the transformation was nearly complete. I still had to put theory into practice. I started flirting and socializing with some of the men in my classes. I wanted to overcome my introversion, she said, pausing briefly before continuing. Stella, I had no idea you felt that way in high school, I interjected. You have to understand. I was a geek, much like you felt. I was drawn to you not because of your appearance, but because you were captivating. After a moment's pause, I added, There was another reason I asked you out, though. What was it? You said yes. You were the only girl who ever agreed when I asked for a date. Initially, that was the main reason. But by the 3rd date, I wanted to be with you for you. We just clicked. I regretted saying goodbye, but at 18, I hadn't really thought beyond college. I never expected or even imagined that a casual chat with an old friend would lead to true confessions. Stella greeted me warmly, grasped my hand with both of hers, and leaned against me briefly. You must have men falling all over themselves to be with you, looking as good as you do and as confident as you seem, I remarked, grinning broadly. No, there's no one special, Steve. I've had 2 serious relationships since college, but something was missing, so we ended things, she replied. I gestured towards the others at the table, silently inquiring. Leaning closer to ensure privacy, Stella whispered, These people are just acquaintances, or not even that, more like companions. Kyle over there fetching drinks has asked me out at least a dozen times. I enjoy the attention, so instead of rejecting him outright, I smile and say maybe, and he keeps pursuing. 2 of the 3 girls I'm helping to reinvent themselves like I did. Meanwhile, they end up with some of my former suitors. She chuckled once more at my expression. Come on, you know that less attractive girls often hang around with a pretty girl, not just for friendship, but to get closer to guys they might not have a chance with. That doesn't reflect well on them, does it? I was taken aback by her honesty. It shows they're savvy enough to seize an opportunity, she replied. And what about the other 2? They're a couple now. I used to date Braid, but when we broke up, Sherry got together with him. They seem happy together, which is a positive outcome. Sherry's like one of my success stories, you know. I couldn't help but grimace at the shift in her demeanor. The girl I once knew was reserved, lacking in confidence, and kept to herself, except around me. The transformed Stella exuded confidence, almost to the point of arrogance or excessive conceit. Personally, I preferred the old Stella. There was a tough exterior to this new version. Well, I suppose I should head off. Classes in the morning and all that. It's been, perhaps, interesting is the word. Seeing you again, Stella. Best of luck with your projects, I said, rising to leave. She stood up, hugged me, and kissed my cheek once more. It wasn't a half-hearted hug, you know, the kind where they hug you but keep their body distant. This was a genuine embrace, meant to convey a woman's affection. And let me tell you, Stella felt amazing. As she handed me a card, she said, Here are my home and cell numbers. Give me a call, and we can chat some more. It was almost like an order. Queen Stella the First had spoken. Once again, I was taken aback by her transformation. In less than 2 hours with the new Stella, I wasn't impressed. Sure, her appearance and confidence had improved, but she seemed to have lost the sweetness, kindness, and thoughtfulness she once had. It didn't seem like a fair trade-off to me. Returning the card to Stella, I remarked, There's no need for further conversation. We've already revisited our past between then and now. You've moved on and don't require another member for your entourage. I'm happy to see you content, Stella. Farewell." Without waiting for her response or any argument, I walked away, having had my fill of Her Majesty for now. As I neared the door, I caught Kyle's voice saying, "How dare he speak to you like that? Should I fetch him back and force an apology out of him?" Stella burst into laughter. "Do you honestly believe you could make him do anything he didn't want to? Just look at his sizz, you fool." Part of me wished Kylie had attempted to drag me back, as it would have been amusing, and I was slightly perturbed. I craved someone to share that sentiment with. I was dismayed by how my high school friend had transformed into such a self-absorbed individual. After Stella and I went our separate ways for college after high school, she remained on my mind frequently. During my first Christmas break, I returned home hoping to reconnect with her, only to discover that her parents had relocated. Despite my efforts to obtain her address from her college, I was unsuccessful as they wouldn't disclose any information or confirm her enrollment. Through somewhat cunning methods, I later learned that she wasn't even attending the college I had assumed. Losing track of her left me feeling a bit melancholic. Though it wasn't romantic love, reminiscing about our past filled me with warmth and gratitude. We had a positive influence on each other during those years. Perhaps that's why witnessing Stella's transformation stirred feelings of frustration within me. The friend I once knew seemed to have vanished. 3 weeks later, after indulging in a hearty dinner consisting of pepperoni pizza and a beer, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, to my surprise, Stella stood there, adding to the complexities of my already busy life. "Are you going to let me in?" she inquired, her smile unwavering. After welcoming her into my apartment, she glanced around and remarked somewhat sarcastically, "Nice place in Steve." I resided in a modest second-floor walk-up, a simple studio apartment comprising a single spacious room, serving as a living area, dining space, and a small galley kitchen, with a bathroom accessible through a doorway. My focus was on pursuing a postgraduate degree, not on hosting guests, so the setup suited me well. Having worked for 2 years post-obtaining my bachelor's degree, I managed to save up enough funds to pursue further education. Being in the field of information and systems analysis allowed me to synchronize my work and classes, working part-time for approximately 25 to 30 hours per week. It's a place for rest and study, which is all I really need. What brings you here, Stella? Wait, how did you track me down? You're listed in the phone book. Nonsense, the only phone I have is a cell. How did you find me? Stella paused, smiled, and replied, "It was clear you weren't going to reach out to me, so I did some digging. One of my acquaintances works in the registrar's office, and I had her search for your address. I'll ask again, why are you here? I wanted to meet and talk to you without the entourage, as you put it. Why? We haven't been close for the past 5 or 6 years. We were friends long ago when we were younger. I don't understand why you feel the need for a heart-to-heart with me. Do you remember that night at Kelly's when I mentioned I'd only had 2 serious relationships and felt like something was missing? When I saw you, I realized that what was missing was you." I began to comment on the absurdity of her statement, but she halted me. "Wait, let me finish, please," she requested. "I mentioned wanting to change because of your departure, although I realize that's not exactly what happened. However, that was my initial motivation. As I delved into Project Stella, I started gaining confidence and soon realized you hadn't really left. You had just moved on to college, as I had. Nonetheless, I continued working on self-improvement, spurred by the progress I was making. This is the end result, and now I'd like to reconnect with you." I interrupted her, asking, "What are your intentions here, Stella? Perhaps we could go out a few times, maybe rekindle our friendship, and who knows, maybe it could evolve into something more. I'm not certain, but I do know I want to spend time with you." "Why me? You clearly have plenty of options. Why choose me?" "Steve, you were the only guy who asked me out in high school. You didn't care about my weight, my lack of makeup, my unconventional style. You were always kind to me. While I have no trouble finding dates now, they often focus solely on appearances. not on who I am. It would take a complete fool not to desire spending a few evenings with such an incredibly beautiful woman, unless she had a terrible personality. I might not be the brightest person around, but I'm not foolish, and she hadn't shown any signs of being unpleasant to me, only to Kyle. What ultimately mattered to me was the friendship we shared in high school. If I could rediscover that same person beneath her beauty, this could be intriguing. I'd like us to be friends again, but I do have a few conditions, I said to Stella. Such as? Now she was smiling. When we hang out or go on dates, I need to be your main focus. No entourage, no group of friends, just us. I worked hard and saved up for 2 years to come back to school for my master's degree, so I don't have much extra money. We won't be dining at any fancy 5-star restaurants or extravagant places. Stella listened attentively, nodding in acknowledgement. Before she could respond, I added, "One more thing. Our time spent together will be limited, and I'm primarily focused on my studies, not socializing." "Is that all?" she asked. "Yeah, that's it. I realize I might come off as rigid, setting these conditions, but I view my time as an investment, something I could spend on studying or extra work. I'd like to reconnect with the old friend I knew, but I'm unsure about this new version of Stella. If you're not up for it, I understand. May I pose a question?" I nodded, and she inquired, "Would you be up for grabbing pizza tomorrow night?" The following evening, we ventured out for pizza, marking the beginning of our endeavor to reconnect. Stella and I engaged in typical friend activities, such as going on hikes, having picnics, attending free outdoor concerts, exploring the art museum, and simply getting reacquainted with each other. We had a great time and thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. On a couple of occasions, while at Kelly's or one of the other off-campus bars, we unexpectedly encountered Stella's circle of friends. It wasn't planned, and Stella suggested finding another place, but I decided to stay and join the group. I couldn't expect her to forsake her friends completely. I must admit, contrary to my initial reservations, I had a great time, and I found these individuals to be intriguing and a lot of fun. The first time we joined their group, Kyle immediately sprang up to fetch drinks for Her Majesty and her consort. I gently nudged him back into his seat and inquired if anyone else desired another round. Kyle trailed after me to assist in carrying the drinks back to the table. "Kyle, what on earth are you doing? I understand you have feelings for Stella, but she'll never consider you as more than a friend if you continue to act like a love-struck puppy. Stand tall and assert yourself," I advised him. I couldn't help it. I loathed seeing any guy being walked over. I'm not certain, but I believe he took my counsel. I never spotted him with the group again. On one of our off nights, I dropped by Kelly's for a burger and spotted Stella dancing with another man. Her entourage occupied a couple of tables near the dance floor. It wasn't a big deal. We weren't exclusive, and I couldn't expect her to wait eagerly for my call at home. Nevertheless, I must confess, seeing her with another man unsettled me. I found myself contemplating Stella in a different light, considering her not just as a friend anymore. Perhaps it's time to evaluate where Stella and I stand. Maybe it's time to progress beyond mere companionship. However, committing to a full-fledged romantic relationship was the last thing on my mind, especially with my post-grad degree looming ahead. Perhaps it would be wise to scale back our friendship. On the other hand, I cherished our outings and didn't want to revert to a life consumed by studies and work. I was thoroughly perplexed. As Stella caught my eye at the end of their dance, she smiled and gestured for me to join her at her table. I waved back, smiled, and shook my head. Finishing my beer, I wrapped up the burger to go and headed back to my apartment. Less than 30 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. Unexpectedly, it was Stella. Initially, she greeted me with a smile, but then her expression turned sour as she entered my apartment. "Why didn't you come over and join us?" she asked. "I thought you were on a date. I didn't want to intrude," I replied. "That wasn't a date. He's just someone who started hanging around with us after Kyle left," she clarified. "Why didn't you join us? You've spent time with our group before." "So Kyle finally left the group," I remarked, relieved to hear that he had asserted himself. "Yeah, it's strange. I hadn't seen him for weeks, then I bumped into him at a coffee shop. When I asked where he'd been, he said he was tired of playing the lovesick puppy. He told me if I wanted to see him, I knew how to reach him, and then he walked away. Very odd behavior indeed. I couldn't help but chuckle. Kyle had essentially stood up to Her Majesty Stella. I admired his courage. Stella noticed my smile and heard my laughter, asking, "Did you play a role in Kyle leaving?" I simply pointed out to him that unless he stopped obeying your every command, you'd never truly respect him or consider going out with him. Seems like he got the message. She shook her head, smiling. So what's the real reason you didn't join us? I took a deep breath, held it momentarily, and then exhaled. It was time to come clean. I didn't like seeing you dance with another man. I know, I said preemptively, before Stella could interject. We're just supposed to be friends. Stella smiled again, taking my hand and leading me to the sofa, pulling me down beside her. Continue, she encouraged. Drawing in another deep breath, I confessed, we never discussed exclusivity. I mean, why would we? Being just friends and all. But I've realized I want more than that, and rather than cause any trouble, I decided to come home. She climbed onto my lap, murmuring, I've been feeling the same way about us. I was waiting for you to make the next move, but I guess I'll have to do it. Then she kissed me. Thus began the next phase of our relationship, where we transitioned from simply hanging out to going on actual dates. We became exclusive, or going steady, as they say. Stella's circle of acquaintances transformed into genuine friends, rather than mere followers, and she would spend evenings with them when I was occupied with work or studies. Any male members of the group were promptly informed that Stella was off limits, so there was no point in pursuing her romantically. The dominance of Stella as the queen bee faded away, and we didn't miss that persona. Instead, I found myself with a partner who resembled the old Stella, and I was glad to have her back. We continued to spend time together until I completed my postgraduate studies. On the day of my graduation, I proposed to Stella, and she accepted. We opted for a spontaneous wedding in Las Vegas over a long weekend, and shortly afterward, I began my new job. In the initial 3 years of our marriage, everything was going smoothly. We had thorough discussions about our expectations and desires in a partner, reaching agreements on crucial aspects. We had already decided that having children, buying a house, and fidelity discussions would come later. I expressed the importance of honesty, proposing that if either of us felt unhappy or dissatisfied with our marriage to the extent of seeking someone else, we should openly communicate instead of resorting to infidelity. We both acknowledged that it would be more respectful to address our concerns and part ways amicably. As we now had the time and financial means to indulge in activities we couldn't during my time in graduate school, we embarked on weekend getaways, humorously referring to them as mini honeymoons. Fulfilling one of my long-standing desires, we flew to San Antonio one weekend to visit the Alamo and enjoy the river walk. Another weekend, at Stella's request, we visited Hearst's Castle. Throughout these experiences, we were thoroughly enjoying ourselves and nurturing our love for each other. At the onset of our 4th year of marriage, there was a shift in dynamics. Her Majesty Stella returned, exhibiting occasional signs of irritability towards me and issuing directives rather than requests. Initially, I remained silent, but upon the 3rd or 4th instance, I confronted her about it. She attributed her behavior to workplace stress and apologized, pledging to be more mindful. Despite a brief return to her usual self, the pattern resumed shortly thereafter. After enduring this cycle for the 3rd time, I reached my limit. I'm uncertain about the cause of your distress, Stella, but whatever it is, it must be addressed. I refuse to be treated like one of your former subordinates. If there's an issue with me or our relationship, let's address it openly and resolve it. Stella apologized, shed some tears, and asked for forgiveness, which I granted. We reconciled that evening, yet I failed to delve deeper into the underlying problem and her peculiar behavior. That night at O'Toole's marked a turning point. Instead of being with her sister as she claimed, she was caught in a passionate embrace with another man in a secluded booth. It was evident that this wasn't their first rendezvous. Whether their interactions had escalated beyond mere kissing or not was irrelevant. The moment she deceitfully lied, the moment she intimately engaged with him, the moment she clandestinely sought his company, our marriage ceased to exist. I had heard various reactions of husbands discovering infidelity. Some crumbled under the weight of betrayal, some meticulously gathered evidence for divorce, some concocted elaborate schemes for revenge, and some resorted to violence against the adulterer, sometimes even the unfaithful wife. I, however, chose none of these paths. My initial reaction upon seeing them together was disbelief, followed by a questioning of her motives, and ultimately, anger. Stella was too astute and self-assured to fall for cheap advances. This man was clearly there by her invitation. While he was undoubtedly reprehensible for engaging with a married woman, I couldn't entirely fault him. After all, Stella was undeniably captivating. No, the bulk of my anger was reserved for my unfaithful wife. As I approached them, I wasn't particularly concerned about the man becoming physical. After all, I believed I had the moral high ground, didn't I? The reason for my lack of concern was simple. I stand at 6'4" with a solid physique. Might makes right, isn't that what they say? My estranged wife and her companion didn't notice me until I settled into the seat opposite them. They abruptly stopped their intimate gestures, and if it weren't for the fact that it was my wife, the expressions on their faces would have been comical. I've heard the phrase about someone's face turning white with shock, but I had never witnessed it until now. Stella's mouth moved like a fish out of water, opening and closing in disbelief. It would have been amusing if it weren't Stella sitting there. "I didn't realize your sister underwent a sex change, Stella," I remarked solemnly. "Perhaps that's why her fiancé ended things with her." Stella's response was typical. She exclaimed, "Oh my God, what are you doing here? It's not what it looks like, it's not what you think," and so on. Her so-called friend thought it wise to make a swift exit from the booth. I reached out and prevented him from leaving. "You'd better stick around, buddy. Stella will need a place to stay, and when I'm gone, you can take her with you." "No, I'll go home with you, Steve. We can talk and I can explain everything," Stella insisted. "Stella, you don't have a home anymore. You forfeited that the moment you got involved with this jerk. Don't bother coming home, don't call, and don't attempt to see me. My attorney will contact you at work to obtain your attorney's information, and we'll let them handle it," I responded. "Give me your wallet," I demanded from the man sitting across from me. He hesitated, so I warned, "Don't force me to take it from you after knocking you out. You're getting a free pass here because she invited you, so don't act foolish." Reluctantly, he handed me his wallet. I retrieved his driver's license and returned the wallet to him. "That's so I know who to subpoena if necessary, Jerry. Getting a replacement license shouldn't be too hard." I glanced at the pair and continued, "Stella, in this no-fault state, we'll simply split everything evenly. If you want, you can keep the apartment. Don't drag this out, and it'll be resolved quickly." Good old Jerry started muttering something to Stella about his wife and family. "You two deserve each other," I remarked as I slid out of the booth. "Have a good night." I headed home to pack, ignoring the immediate ringing of my cell phone. Not tonight, Stella. Not tonight, I thought. If someone had observed me confronting Stella, they might have labeled me a cold-hearted jerk. They wouldn't have seen the pain of losing the girl from high school, rediscovering her, and then losing her again. On the journey home, I resolved not to fall into the trap some husbands in my position might succumb to. I wouldn't drown my sorrows in alcohol or indulge in self-pity. Those coping mechanisms only delayed the inevitable confrontation with one's problems. The only effective approach was to meet them face to face and punish them properly. As I returned to our apartment, the phone was ringing, displaying Stella's sister's caller ID. Having somewhat composed myself, I picked up, assuming it was Stella, only to find it was Betty. "What's happening, Steve? Stella just arrived and she's a wreck. She's crying and saying things she didn't mean," Betty exclaimed. "I caught your sister with her boyfriend tonight and ended things. I told her not to return home, so she must have come to your place," I explained. "Boyfriend? What boyfriend? Are you sure you saw correctly, Steve? There must be some misunderstanding," Betty questioned. "The misunderstanding lies with Stella. Let her know I'll be out of the apartment by tomorrow evening and she can return then. Goodbye, Betty," I stated firmly, ending the call abruptly. "Steve, wait, but—" I disconnected the call, muted the phone and the answering machine to avoid further interruptions. My cell phone began to ring incessantly, prompting me to power it off. I packed most of my belongings, including clothes and my computer, planning to stay at a motel for a few days until finding a new apartment. The following morning, I discovered roughly 12 messages on the answering machine and another 15 or 20 in my cell phone's voicemail. I briefly listened to each, recognizing they were either from Stella or Betty, before deleting them. The only call I returned was from my father. "What's happening, Steve?" he inquired when I phoned him. "Stella called multiple times, either wanting to speak with you or asking me to reach out on her behalf. I found her with some guy in a bar, of all places, getting intimate. She didn't take it well when I suggested she shouldn't return home. Perhaps it was a mistake, maybe nothing happened beyond that. Why not hear her out? I'd hate to see your relationship end over this. Dad, whether or not she slept with him doesn't change the fact that she deceived me to meet with him. Still, you should give her a chance to explain, don't you think?" "All right, Dad, I'll talk to her just to get her off your back, but regardless of what she says, it's over between us," I affirmed. That afternoon, I dialed Betty's number and requested to speak with Stella. When she answered, she immediately launched into apologies, claiming she hadn't slept with him and that it didn't mean anything, but I cut her off. "Stella, listen to me. Stop crying and listen. When we got married, we agreed that if things went south, we'd part ways rather than disrespect each other. But for some reason, you chose not to honor that and became the epitome of a cliché, a cheating spouse. But Steve, I swear I didn't sleep with him. It was just harmless flirting. It didn't mean anything and I—" "Stop. It meant something to me, Stella. It showed a lack of respect for me. It shattered my perception of your love for me. And it signaled that it was time to end things. Please, let's meet and talk. I can explain everything and what really happened," Stella pleaded. "You're not listening. I don't care why. I only care that you did it. I don't need to know what really happened. The lies and deceit are enough, and your infidelity is the final straw. Don't call me, and stop bothering my dad. Just sign the papers when they arrive, and let's make this as painless as possible. Goodbye, Stella." The divorce was completed and concluded within a mere 3 months. Stella didn't resist or contest the division of assets, so it proceeded smoothly. Although she requested a meeting with me prior to signing the papers, I declined. There was nothing she could say or do to change my perspective on her actions. Following my departure from our apartment, I discovered a pleasant studio apartment on the first floor. Since it was just me, I wasn't seeking any commitments, so the size was adequate. I preferred allocating my funds towards toys rather than a larger living space. I waited until my divorce was finalized before I began socializing or dating. O'Toole's and Kelly's ceased to be my preferred spots due to Stella, so I had to discover a new hangout. I stumbled upon a spot named Connor's Pub and Grill, which turned out to be ideal. They served quality drinks, offered good simple food, and provided exceptional service. The atmosphere was welcoming and comfortable, making it a great place to unwind. I started frequenting there for dinner on Friday nights. One of the owners, Jake Connor, struck up a rapport with me. He was a large man like myself, and we connected easily. I shared my story of woe, and he empathized, saying he'd been through similar experiences. Jake handed me a complimentary beer and shared some wisdom, noting that sometimes you have to navigate through the challenges of life to find someone truly special. After approximately 6 months, I ultimately made the decision not to let my past with Stella hinder me from going wherever I pleased. Consequently, I frequented Kelly's with a few co-workers on occasions, and sometimes Stella would be there. Her entourage was fully restored. This time, she had 2 men catering to her every whim. Stella, in all her regal glory, had returned. Surprisingly, it didn't affect me much, but I relished the sight of her expression whenever I departed with another woman. One of these women was Julie Wilson, with whom I had a pretty strong relationship. After our first meeting at Kelly's, she got in touch every 2 or 3 weeks to make an appointment. Despite my previous confidence in my bed skills, I found that compared to Julia, I was a beginner and she was an expert. I observed an odd pattern. Whenever Julie and I met up, she typically had to depart by midnight, but approximately every 6 weeks, she would spend the entire night with me. I found it puzzling, but I didn't voice any complaints. Frankly, I'm not sure I could have handled her presence every night. As the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. This pleasant arrangement abruptly ended one evening as Julie was preparing to leave earlier than usual, around 9 p.m. I attempted to persuade her to stay a little longer for another round. "I can't do it, honey. I have to meet Jack at 10:30 at the lamplighter," she chuckled, stepping back from me. "I need to go home and freshen up before seeing him." "Am I being replaced?" I teased. "Who's this Jack who's taking my place?" "Jack's my husband, silly." Then she noticed the surprised expression on my face. "I thought you knew I was married and we were just having some fun." "How would I know? You never mentioned a husband or anything," I replied, feeling more than a little upset. No wonder she wouldn't give me her phone number or tell me where she worked or lived. She didn't want me to disrupt her little adventures. "Oops, my mistake. But don't worry, honey. He'll be away on his trip next week, and I can spend the whole night with you. I'll call you next week, baby," she said, leaning over to kiss my cheek. I felt like a jerk. I was doing to Jack what that jerk had done to me with Stella. Damn, I felt foolish and manipulated. Then anger surged within me. Jack Wilson was likely a decent man, working hard to support his wife while she was being unfaithful. I knew I wasn't her only lover, but before I discovered she was married, I didn't care. It wasn't morality or principles or any lofty philosophy that drove me. It was pure rage, and I was determined that someone would finally face consequences. After a quick shower, I searched for the lamplighter's address and headed out to find Jack Wilson. So here I am, sprawled on the barroom floor, pondering whether Jack Wilson is about to kick me. "Listen, Mr. Wilson, Jack. I acknowledge that I owed you that one, perhaps even another. I'll stand up now, and if you deem it necessary, you can take another swing. But once that's done, I'll defend myself," I informed him. I rose, fully anticipating him to strike me again, but instead he stood before me, his eyes ablaze with hatred. Gesturing towards the bar stools, we both took a seat. The bartender held the phone, presumably calling the cops, so I motioned for him to lower it, assuring him that everything was under control. Ordering 2 of Jack's drinks, I began recounting my tale. "I swear, Jack, I had no idea she was married until tonight. If I had known, I never would have gotten involved with her." He appeared skeptical, so I gave him a condensed version of Stella and me. I always felt she never faced consequences, but all I wanted was to get out. Revenge wasn't my thing. I could see in his eyes that he now believed me. "Here's my card. If you decide to divorce her or whatever, feel free to call me if you need me to testify or provide a statement for you," I offered. He nodded, slipping the card into his wallet. I signaled for another drink for him and rose to leave. "Before you decide, Jack, there's something else you should know. I'm not the only one. She contacts me every couple of weeks to meet up, and I don't think she's spending the rest of her time at home. Good luck, Jack. You deserve better than this." "Wait, Stevie. Would you stick around and confront her when she arrives? I'd like to see her wreaked you into your presence." I nodded and made my way to a secluded booth at the back, out of sight from Jack's position or the entrance. "This should be amusing or perhaps intriguing," I mused. About 10 minutes later, Julie breezed in. She approached Jack, exclaiming, "Hi, darling, I've missed you so much." After a hug and a kiss, she added, "Could you order me a drink, please? I need to use the restroom." Off she went. When she returned, Jack had relocated, and she took his seat, facing away from my booth. After a few minutes, Jack gestured for me to come over. Approaching Julie from behind, I asked, "Hi, Julie. Can I get you and your friend a drink?" She turned, caught sight of me, then glanced back at Jack before fainting. I exchanged a nod with Jack and departed. 3 months later, I received a call from Jack Wilson. He explained that he wanted to update me on what had transpired between him and Julie. According to Jack, he allowed Julie to persuade him into attending marriage counseling sessions, during which Julie consistently tried to shift blame onto him for an entire month, twice a week. She complained about his frequent travels, claiming she felt lonely, and so forth. Jack mentioned he realized it was a mistake when the therapist started seating with Julie. Fed up, he told them both off and initiated divorce proceedings. Apparently, Julie didn't want her actions to be exposed, so she didn't contest the divorce. Jack anticipated being officially divorced in another month or so. I reassured Jack, saying, "Don't let it get you down, you'll get through this." As a friend once wisely said to me, "Life goes on. The key is to keep moving forward." 10 years on, I'm ready to share everything that has happened during this significant period of time. Let's start with the good news, as tradition dictates. Jack and I grew closer through shared struggles. Initially, we would gather to commiserate over our disappointments with our ex-partners over a pint at our favorite bar. As time passed and the pain subsided, we discovered we had many common interests and topics to discuss. We began to meet more often, and with each encounter, our friendship grew stronger. Today, I'm grateful to fate for giving me such a loyal friend who will always support me in difficult times. Additionally, he introduced me to his charming sister at his birthday party. That meeting turned my life upside down. Unlike my ex-wife Stella, Kate harbored no bitterness. She was the sweetest and kindest person I had ever met. We started dating, and within a couple of months I realized I couldn't imagine my life without Kate. She agreed to marry me, and we welcomed wonderful triplets into our lives. I was in shock. Never once did I feel distrust towards Kate. She never gave me any reason to doubt her. I tried to be the best husband for her, especially considering the threats from her older brother, who promised me trouble if I ever hurt her. So we've been living in love and harmony in our close-knit family for 10 years now, and I couldn't imagine a happier fate. When I think back on the reasons for our past misfortunes, it seems that karma finally caught up with them, though it didn't happen immediately. As they say, everything comes in its own time for those who know how to wait. As for my ex-wife, she continued to play the role of queen until she met a similar narcissist who turned out to be the father of her child. Despite lingering guilt, they decided to keep the pregnancy and start their own family. In this situation, Stella had to sacrifice much to please her narcissistic husband, including giving up friends and admirers. But she preferred this fate to being a single mother. At first, everything seemed fine, but Stella's pregnancy whims annoyed her husband, who began seeking solace elsewhere. Stella tried to resist his infidelity but faced his aggression and humiliations. Over time, she accepted her husband's affairs and learned to live with the mockery of those around her, as she was financially dependent on him. As for Julie, it seemed for a long time that fate was kind to her. Immediately after divorcing Jack, she married a wealthy older man but started seeking lovers on the side. One day, she made a fatal mistake by accidentally paying for a motel with her husband's credit card. As a result, he kicked her out, depriving her of everything dear to her. Trying to move in with her lover, she encountered misfortune on the road, ending up in the hospital. Am I glad about this outcome? It doesn't matter to me. I'm not vengeful. But once again, I've realized that you can't play wicked games with fate. Otherwise, it will strike back, and it will hurt badly.
That's the end of the story. Write your opinion in the comments about this story. It will be interesting for us to read it. Also, do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel so as not to miss new, equally interesting and exciting stories. Good luck!